I'm very happy to present our third and last speaker of this session, Carol Pfaff, Professor of Linguistics at Freie Universität Berlin. The title of her presentation is Ideologies, Policies, Practices of Multilingualism, Perspectives from Germany in the 21st Century.
Thank you. Good, thank you. Well, I too would like to begin with great thanks to the organizers of this really terrific conference. I'm very much enjoying it, and the continuation of my predecessors on this panel today simply make it even better than it was already. My talk is going to be about, it's very much closer to the ground. And I have modified my title just a little to add Europe to perspectives from Germany/Europe, Germany in Europe in the 21st century, because many of the things that are going on are as a result of European policies and treaties and agreements and so on. So, has it moved? Yes. These are the topics that I'd like to raise. What you can see on the screen in my outline is color-coded so that the blue parts are kind of the topics, and the pink parts are the ones that I want to make more extensive comments about. So I'll go rather quickly through some of the parts and spend a little bit more time on the others. So first I'd like to talk about, we've been talking about multilingualism. The name of this conference is Multilingualism 2.0 ? But many of the aspects that I want to discuss are not discussed in terms of the word multilingualism, but rather plurilingualism and polylingualism. I want to go briefly over language issues and ideologies, overt and to a certain extent covert policies, the familiar languages problem, right, resource, and also adding duty with respect to minority languages of a couple of different types. And we've talked a couple of times during the conference already about Denglish, about the use of English in German and what problems, what controversies that raises inside Germany. Then I'm going to talk about plurilingualism particularly in education, plurilingual education, education for plurilingualism, and how that looks. And I've spent the last 35 years of my life in Berlin, and I'm starting to widen my scope a little bit and looking at the surrounding land, the surrounding Bundesland, Brandenburg, that Berlin is actually an island within. So eventually I'll get all the way up to Germany, but right now I've been looking at Berlin and Brandenburg to look at the differential status of some languages other than German and some of the problems raised by pluricentric languages in some of the educational modes. And then to focus on plurilingualism and polylingualism in a number of different areas. So briefly, to review, the Council of Europe in 2008 proposed 2 terms instead of 1 term for what we usually call societal multilingualism or individual multilingualism, proposing multilingualism is the presence in a geographical area of more than one variety of language, that is the mode of speaking of a social group, whether formally recognized as language or not, dialects. Individuals may be monolingual, speaking only their own variety. In contrast to plurilingualism, which we would call individual, maybe we could call it plurilingualism too. Individual multilingualism, the repertoire of varieties of language which many individuals use, and it's therefore the opposite of monolingualism. It includes the language variety referred to as mother tongue or first language, and any number of other languages or varieties. And some individuals are monolingual, and some are plurilingual. Note that in these definitions, the Council of Europe avoided talking about standard or non-standard variety, and it didn't raise the issue that we've talked about here about mother tongue or first language at all. More recently, people have talked about polylingualism in several ways. Hybridity in youth language varieties has been extensively described in terms of code mixing, code switching, code oscillation, language crossing, fused lects, code amalgamation, all included in what Norman Jorgensen calls polylingual languaging in his work in 2008. Polylingualism, in another sense, family and friendship and occupational networks, studies of language choice over generations in context of language shift or maintenance that are very characteristic in Europe. And finally, I want to introduce to you, maybe some of you know this already, I didn't know it until only about a week ago, I'm embarrassed to say, a new project or a new set of projects being proposed to look at language choices in transnational communication, and I'll talk more about that. So very briefly, language issues in politics and policies. Language as problem, language as right, language and resource are familiar to us from Ruiz 1984, and Chris Horner has recently added language as duty in her article in 210 in Language Policy. Language as problem gets turned into language as duty. It's prominent at the national levels. We see it in requirements on adults, requirements in particular for Germany, requirements for immigration, for residents, for naturalization, and children language education with an emphasis on the national language. Language as right we see prominent at international and European levels, both in regional minority languages and in immigrant languages. Language as resource, which we've been talking about, prominent at the European level, education for plurilingualism at national and state levels, and the project that I'm going to mention, the Toolkit for Transcultural Communication. So to look at language problems, the sources of these language problems and the proposed solutions, adult immigrants continue using their first language in many situations as a result of how they live, in what geographical proximity to each other they live, in lack of geographical proximity in districts to native speakers of what used to be called host language, which is perceived as restricting their integration into the host societies, and that's led to more stringent language policies for immigration, naturalization, and integration policies for selected adults, and I'll talk about who gets selected there in a second. The children of immigrants are exposed to much more L1 and non-native majority language varieties than to standard or colloquial native varieties, and this lack of proficiency in standard and other native German varieties contributes to the problems of educational achievement or lack of educational achievement and integration, and the PISA International Comparative Study of educational achievement. Germany did very poorly on that. That was a terrible shock. The PISA shock is often referred to because the Germans have been very, very proud of their educational system and their high regard for Bildung, and as opposed to just what we Americans learn on the ground, a bunch of facts that we spit back on multiple choice tests. And that's led, and the current focus on German language proficiency, Deutsch als Zweitsprache, DATS, and restrictive German-only policies in some schools, which have been rather widely discussed, and most recently, some school reforms. So here's a couple of examples briefly of German proficiency requirement for immigrations of spouses. The actual, the invited labor migration of the 60s has stopped long ago, but they still permit family reunification. And family reunification no longer means the spouse is left behind or the children left behind, but increasingly means that people in the second generation, rather than marrying somebody else from the second generation, go back to the home country and get a spouse, and then that spouse immigrates to Germany or one of the other countries. So this is considered undesirable by the German government, and they're trying to restrict it. And in 2007, they reformed the Immigration Act, particularly to try to restrict who can immigrate. So they said, I think I'll just read the English, a residence permit shall be granted to the spouse of a foreign national if, various things, the spouse is able to communicate in the German language, at least in a simple manner. So that means they have to have already mastered German, at least in a simple manner, before they're allowed to immigrate. But it does not affect the granting of a residence permit if, of course, people from the European Union countries can come in freely, but if on the basis of his nationality, the foreign national can enter and remain in the Federal Republic without a visa, even for a longer period. And you don't find this right away, but if you look, those countries that can immigrate for a longer period or where they can stay without a visa include Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the USA, and also Israel, Japan, and the Korean Republic. So the fact that Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the USA are in there, you might think, oh, those languages are so close they won't have any trouble learning German, they'll integrate easily. We know this is not so easy, but the fact that Israel, Japan, and the Korean Republic are also in there lets you know this is not a language thing. This is using the language argument to do social restrictive policy. So, and what this has led to is not that fewer people, well, it's arguable whether or not fewer people now are applying to be permitted in as joining their spouse, but it's led to the rise of German language courses offered by the Goethe Institute and other such institutions, in Turkey at least, I haven't seen anywhere else, that simply teach people enough German to be able to fit that requirement and pass the test and get in. Another area in which you see language functions as a, let's say, gatekeeping policy, the integration courses, if the idea is that the immigrants refuse to integrate, and that's partly because they refuse to learn German. And so the integration course was initiated in January 2005. This is supposed to help. And it's obligatory for new arrivals, okay, and for unemployed residents of 5 years or more, without adequate knowledge of German, adequate defined by whom, or, this is really the crucial, or otherwise deemed in need of integration. Otherwise in need of integration, deemed by whom, and what? How do they judge it? And the course consists primarily of instruction in German, 600 hours of instruction in German, if the people are illiterate in their own language, 945 hours. With 30 hours of civic orientation, historical, legal, cultural aspects of German life. All of this is extremely controversial, but this is not the time to talk about it. There are sanctions. If you don't go to the class that you're supposed to go to for all those hours to take German, you could have your unemployment support cut down, or other kind of social welfare support. To my knowledge, they're not actually doing this. They are not actually cutting people, but they could. Whereas for German, for children and adolescents, the solution is more German or German only. A lot of remedial German, DATS, at preschools, increasingly preschools and primary schools. And one of the two schools that I've listed here has been very much in the news, even in the US, probably everywhere else. A German-only requirement on the school grounds at the Herbert Hoover Oberschule. The Hausordnung says, I'm just going to read the English. The school language of our school is German, the official language of the Federal Republic of Germany. Every pupil is required to communicate only in this language within the jurisdiction of these regulations. That means on the school grounds. So that means even during recess, or before school starts or after school starts, if you're on the school ground, you must speak German. It was like this in the United States as well. When I taught at the University of Texas at Austin, I had students in my class who remembered going to school where if they were caught speaking Spanish, they were hit. And they don't do that at this school. But nonetheless, this was also extremely controversial, and a lot of people protested. It's not humane. If you're in class and everything's happening in German, you need a little relief, a little comfort zone to be able to speak your own language, just to relax, and lots of other arguments. But that's still on the books. I checked just a few days ago, and it's still there for the academic year 2011-2012, which is now. But as far as I know, nothing really happens, and they don't really stop people from speaking their other languages, and they certainly don't really punish them. And another school, the Robert Koch Oberschule, it's much more lenient. You can speak anything you like on the school grounds, and German only in class, with the exception, of course, English class, or Turkish as zweite Fremdsprache, second foreign language, or some other foreign language. You don't have to do that. By the way, both of these schools have 90 to 95 or 98% pupils of non-German heritage language, nicht deutsche Herkunftssprache. So now on to Denglish. This has been a perennial problem. I don't have time to go into how long this goes back, but just very recently, October 12, 2011, the probably not coincidental representative of the National Democratic Party of Germany, the neo-Nazi party, or a neo-Nazi party, in the state parliament of Saxony, proposed a motion, Deutsch statt Denglisch. And Denglisch isn't really code switching, it's borrowing, or maybe Shana Pfaff would call it nonce borrowing, of words and phrases of English in German. It's very, very extensively done. It's maybe the equivalent of the power code that Hill and Hill talk about in their Speaking Mexicano. But in any case, he introduced a motion to remove the Anglicisms from government announcements, and in general demanded that the German language be protected from foreign words, especially from English, and proposed a new handbook of regulations. And you can actually hear him give this speech if you click on that link. And it was responded to by Miro Yanaryan of the Green Party, also probably not coincidental, to the State Parliament of Saxony. And he argued on the basis that German was the official language, the Amtssprache of the German government, not the national language in the Constitution, and pointing out that many German words in regular German originate in Anglo-Saxon, borrowed words from Latin and various other languages. And he also advised his fellow countrymen to practice how to say the TH. So we were talking a little bit the other day about shibboleths. And here, this is a shibboleth, and there they are. In an earlier paper, I talk a little bit about the arguments about making German the national language because it's not in the Constitution. So now let's turn to language as a right. European treaties and directives for regional minority languages, that is, people who have a territorial claim to have been there first, and immigrant languages. So the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages was adopted in 1992, and it suggests or demands that the nations that agreed to it should protect and promote regional minority languages. In Germany, that's Frisian, Danish, and Sorbian. And it's very complicated. Each party undertakes to apply a minimum of 35 paragraphs or subparagraphs chosen from among the provisions of Part 3 of the Charter, including at least 3 chosen from each of the Articles 8 and 12, and 1 from each of the Articles 9, 10, 11, and 13. So it's like a Chinese dinner. And what these things are about is education in the language and culture of that minority, of that regional minority group, the right to have signage in that language, and the right to have newspapers and TV and radio and everything in that language. And there are organizations that come around and check to see whether or not these rights are actually being honored. The Council of Europe, of the European Communities Directive, this is a predecessor of the European Union, Directive 7746 of the EEC in 1977, supports, and Article 8 supports education in the pupil's heritage language for personal and professional benefits and as facilitating learning. And it wasn't clear when this was first adopted who was meant. It seemed like it meant other European countries, immigrants from other European countries, but in the 2009 report, it explicitly includes all children of persons born outside the country of residence. So it would affect Turks and whoever as well. The implementation of language rights for regional minorities for Sorbian in Brandenburg. Since German reunification, Lower Sorbian is officially supported in educational institutions in Brandenburg, and there's parallel ruling in Saxony. Paragraph 5 of the Brandenburg school law says pupils are guaranteed the right to learn Sorbian, otherwise known as Wendish, and to receive instruction in selected subjects in that language. In addition, the knowledge of the history and culture of Sorbs and Wends is to be provided in the settlement areas of these populations, and that's anchored in the curriculum since 2008. And that means not just to people who themselves are ethnically Sorbish, but to people who aren't as well. And an evaluation of compliance to this in 2007 judged that Germany partly fulfilled the treaty undertakings concerning preschool, primary, and secondary education for Sorbian, noting a shortage of bilingual teachers, insufficient continuity following preschool, and an absence of Sorbian education in all the territories where it is used. The Sorbian institutions are making efforts to beef up their what they can do. Implementation of language rights for immigrant minority languages is much less likely to be enforced now. It is quite spotty. It's offered mainly by or with the assistance of ministries of education of the home countries. This is true for Turkey, Greece, Poland, and also China. There are a few bilingual education programs funded and staffed as part of the regular Berlin school system, motivated as supporting ethnic identity, but also as a resource, languages resource discussed in a couple seconds. These are Turkish-German bilingual literacy classes in Berlin and two-way immersion programs called Europaschulen in 9 different language pairs in Berlin, which is pretty. It's unique, actually. Languages resource is grounded, it goes back farther than the Lisbon strategy, but it's very explicit there, Education for Plurilingualism. In 2000, The European Union adopted the Lisbon Strategy and set the European Union the goal of becoming the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world by 2010, aiming to secure sustainable economic growth with more and better jobs, as well as greater social cohesion. Language learning was seen as crucial, and member states were encouraged to provide foreign language education in the languages of the other EU countries, particularly the languages of immediately bordering European Union countries. So from my perspective in Berlin, Brandenburg, that's Polish, should be Polish. Education for Pluralism, Plurilingualism, the guide published in 2007, says plurilingual education will refer to all activities, curricular or extracurricular, or of whatever nature, which seek to enhance and develop language competence and speakers' individual linguistic repertoires from the earliest school days and throughout life. Education for pluralism will refer to plurilingual education, for example, teaching national, foreign, regional languages, in which the purpose is to develop plurilingualism as a competence, and it will be noted that plurilingual education may also be achieved through activities designed principally to raise awareness of linguistic diversity, but which do not aim to teach such languages and therefore do not constitute language teaching in the strict sense. So is that education for plurilingualism or education for sensitivity to accepting plurilingualism? Here's a look at foreign language offerings in Berlin and Brandenburg in 2010-2011. You can see the numbers. I'm not going to read them to you, but it's obvious that English is up at the top of the list. French is next, Latin, Spanish, Russian, ancient Greek, Turkish is in there, Italian, Chinese is in there, Polish, Japanese, Portuguese, and other, of course, which they don't tell you what it is there. In Brandenburg, the big ones are on the bottom, and that big one is English, and the different colors of the bands pertain to that key up in the right-hand corner of that, which is what kind of a school it's in. Is it in a primary school, secondary school, vocational school? Is it a real foreign language class, or is it what I'll talk about next, a Begegnungssprache, language just to be encountered? So here's what Begegnungssprachen are. In contrast to foreign language instruction, if you think about what the guide to education for plurilingualism that we just looked at said, can be other kinds of activities, not just explicit instruction. In contrast to foreign language instruction, encounter language or Begegnungssprache instruction aims to foster creativity, fantasy, desire for discovery, and appreciation of the linguistic and cultural diversity. Instruction is primarily in oral skills. That is, they learn a few songs, poems, maybe the words for some of the things they're going to talk about in their content courses. In Berlin, in the bilingual literacy classes, you see an asymmetry in these bilingual, in the application of this. In the Turkish-German biliteracy classes, of which there are still 5, Turkish children are taught to read and write in both languages. That is, people with Turkish background, not necessarily Turkish nationality. But German and other L1 children are taught to read in German only, and they have informal content in Turkish as Begegnungssprache. But all kids go to classes that are team taught in both languages by 2 different teachers. In Brandenburg, Begegnungssprachen, there are 3 times as many Polish as Russian classes, the reverse of the situation as in foreign language instruction, but there are double the number of French classes, which certainly doesn't border Brandenburg, and there are 100 times more classes with English as Begegnungssprache. That might as well be foreign language instruction, except I guess it's easier to teach it as a Begegnungssprache. Here's a little close-up of the Turkish-German biliteracy classes, and again, the numbers don't make any difference, but what I want to point out is that the number of Turkish kids in the biliteracy classes is much greater than the number of people for whom the family language is German, and there's a considerable number of children of other ethnic backgrounds. which are listed at the bottom: Albanian, Arabic, Azerbaijan, Austrian, etc. This is a list I got from the schools, and it reflects their categorization. So some of these are languages, and some of them are nationalities, and so on. One could question why those people of other ethnic backgrounds, why their parents are sending them to a Turkish-German biliteracy school. And I think that would be a very interesting study to do. The Europaschulen are two-way bilingual education programs in 9 languages, and they go from first grade all the way through the end of secondary school. So that really is unique. They're not transitional, and they really are two-way bilingual education founded on the assumption that highly proficient multilingualism is advantageous to prepare people for international mobility, for study and work, and to serve as a bridge between Western and Central Europe. They think that a bicultural approach where pupils with different backgrounds learn with and from each other is intended to contribute to combating prejudice and discrimination, which it might. Two-way bilingual Europaschulen in Berlin, there's the years they started: English, French, and Russian, the languages of the occupying forces, led the way with their schools, and Spanish and Italian were next, Turkish and Greek after that, and then Portuguese and Polish. And they all have or are just about to reach their Abitur, ending the college preparatory degree that you need. I've shaded Russian, Turkish, and Polish because those are the schools in which the school type is not a gymnasium, is not the highest type of secondary school. And this was just recently reformed. That is, the school system was recently reformed to abolish the 3-way distinction of Hauptschule, Realschule, Gymnasium, or maybe Gesamtschule, comprehensive school. But these 3, and I think it's no accident that it's those 3, don't have the highest type. And this has some consequences for parents and kids when they move from elementary school to secondary school. Quite everybody's aware of the fact that gymnasium has higher prestige than other things that are not gymnasium. So many parents withdraw their kids, or their kids withdraw themselves from going on to secondary school in this. So they have, I don't know if they've shot themselves in the foot, or whether they secretly hope that some of these schools will die out. I don't know. So here, back to the European, I've called it a charm offensive, popularization, boosterism for plurilingualism. I just wanted to give you a couple of websites, and to say that there was a competition sponsored in 2011 in honor of the European Day of Languages to find kids who would create videos of their linguistic journeys in which they use all the languages that they speak and explained how their language skills have improved their lives. And there's a Language Rich Europe blog, which actually I think is based at the British Council, and it's a gold mine of whatever's going on in Europe, conferences and this and that, and it's worth having a scroll through. Polylingual languaging, I won't go into any detail about hybrid youth varieties. There are many, many publications on German, Dutch, Danish, French, Spanish, Swedish varieties, and other such varieties elsewhere. And they're also used in literary works, and the varieties that are actually observed actually differ from some of the literary representations. Polylingual languaging in the second sense, communication in family and friendship networks. I've been involved in leading, actually, a study in language use of kids with Turkish background in France and Germany, and in particular in Rouen and Lyon and Berlin, in a couple of studies, which are really one study and continuing in and among other things, we look at their language use patterns, self-reported language use patterns. Briefly, here are the kids in the study. They're children of the second generation or the 2.5 generation. I don't know quite what to call them. Kids with one parent of the second generation and the other of the first generation, that is a spouse who joined the other person, or third generation kids, both parents in the second generation. And this is an ongoing study, an analysis of the oral and written production in Turkish and German or French and English. And we've used a very extensive background language use questionnaire and elicited written and oral text from the kids in their monolingual mode in Turkish, German or French, and English. And they've also participated in group discussions. And here is a representation of that. The questionnaires, I'm going to talk about the answers to one of the questions or a series of questions on the questionnaire in a second. But we, of course, ask the kids, what is your mother tongue, or what is your first language, or what are your first languages? And a fair number said it was Turkish, and another fair number said it's Turkish and German, speaking just about the Berlin group. And we asked also, when was your first contact with German or French? Because there's a widespread notion that the kids speak exclusively Turkish at home until they get to school or preschool, and that's not the case. So we asked, when was your first contact with German? Is it in the family? Is it at preschool? Is it in school? And so on. Quite a lot of them said it's in their family. And we asked them also, because we're interested in looking at their proficiency in something like, we're looking for change in Turkish, the diaspora varieties of Turkish as they develop in the contact situation. But we asked them whether or not they've had explicit instruction in Turkish and what kind or where they learned Turkish, because it was incredible that most of these kids could write very competently in Turkish, even those who had never had any formal instruction in Turkish. Turkish is that present in their community. So here, the next two slides are of responses to the questions about their language use with different interlocutors, their grandparents, their mother, their father, their siblings, their friends, the participant to the interlocutor to the participant, and you'll see why I include no answer in this table in a second when we look at the next one. So German and Turkish, I'm interested in code switching and language alternation, language choice, and so on. But German and Turkish here in this table and in the next one includes both mixing Turkish and German together in the same sentence, code switching or code mixing, and it also includes language alternation. But we did ask a series of questions that asked them to estimate to what extent it was, alternation or code switching, just to put it that way, since they perfectly well know what those things are about, whether or not they call them that or not. Some other languages besides German only, Turkish only, German and Turkish were also mentioned. They could include as many languages as they wanted. We had a bunch of ways for them to refer to that. Some reported using ethnic languages like Kurdish or Greek in addition to Turkish, especially with their grandparents or maybe their parents, but not actually very much. A few reported using English, even including with their grandparents and parents. So try to keep this set of figures in mind. I won't go into them. When you look at this one, which is about their self-reported language choice when they're in Turkey, because they go to Turkey very, very frequently. Some go a couple times a year, most go every year, many go every other year. It's very, very common to go back to Turkey, where they also have grandparents, mothers and fathers, siblings and friends, who may or may not be the actual same people that they speak to in those rubrics in Germany. For instance, some of them have different siblings living in Germany and some other siblings are living in Turkey. But we differentiate that, and I just didn't put it into this table. But I want to just raise the issue. If you compare the no answer percentages in that table and contrast it with the no answer in Germany, you see that the no answers are higher in Turkey. Now, I wonder, just in the context of our discussion in the last couple of days about language pain, whether this reflects some kind of unease about what's going on when they're in Turkey. I don't know. But again, that's something that's worthy of some study and trying to unpack that. But it's interesting to note that even in Turkey and even with their grandparents, a fair number use German and Turkish when they're in Turkey with talking to their grandparents, and their grandparents use German and Turkish back. What that actually means on the ground, I don't know. Whether it's just they say a couple words in German and whether they report that, I don't know, but it's something definitely worthy of study, but it's a real example of polylingual behavior. So the last thing I want to talk about is a new project, a new research consortium at several European universities, a toolkit, this is their name for it, a toolkit for transnational communication in Europe. I think their use of the word tool or toolkit is probably, would be beneficial to try to unpack that in discussion with them, which I haven't had a chance to do yet. They claim, and these are all things that I've got off their website, which is listed down at the bottom of this, European integration has gone along with transnational processes which have challenged the traditionally established monolingual communication and raised new possibilities of multilingual communication strategies. Their focus is on the disequilibrium and partial competence rather than on balance of skills. So this is maybe truncated multilingualism that Claire mentioned yesterday. This project is going to bring together research groups to consider the effectiveness of English as a lingua franca, regional lingua franci, lingua receptiva, as they call it, in which each speaker uses his or her mother tongue and the other person, their interlocutor, answers back in their mother tongue, which, as Don called us to question, even with Swedish and Danish is maybe not so totally obvious, although that's considered one of the paradigm examples of where such usage is possible, or code switching. So they bring together research groups to, their phrase, consider the effectiveness of the above-mentioned communicative modes under various conditions. And this is simply a list. I'm just throwing out their names so that you can see whether you recognize these names, already know these people, know their work. You probably know some of them at least. Here's what they propose to do. They want to investigate how actors at various scales, such as individuals, communities, nation states, and supranational institutions and organizations, deal with linguistic diversity in their everyday language choices. This is to be investigated in many different types of communicative settings, such as border regions, public institutions, cities, and families. The major question will be what that's my highlight, the adequate communicative strategy seems to be in these different situations. Communicative efficiency and the preservation of European principles and values, democracy, human rights, equality, social cohesion, economic prosperity, etc., will be reference criteria in establishing what works and what does not. The planned toolkit will comprise a diagnostic, evaluative, and make recommendations, and recommending what communicative mode appears to be the most appropriate under the given circumstances, taking into account communicative efficiency and the EU's fundamental principles and values like democracy, equality, human rights, social cohesion, economic welfare. I think these last two paragraphs here raise many questions about what exactly they want to achieve with this research project. I think we could probably all agree that this is to actually investigate what goes on the ground in real life situations using plurilingual strategies or polylingual strategies is a very nice undertaking. But to consider this as a toolkit that they're going to make recommendations about what to use, does this imply that there's going to be a new polylingual norm about what you can use, what strategy you can use when? Dunno. I'll talk to them. You notice Germany was not in there, so this is one of the reasons I didn't know about this project yet. But I do know some of these people, and I will certainly be discussing these issues with them. And I would like to invite you to raise questions about what ideas you have or what qualms you have about such a research project here. This is how they display. Not every university is going to investigate everything, but this shows what group is going to focus on what. And finally, just to summarize, the ideologies favor German, the official, not the national language. And in practice, that means focus on German L2 for integration of migrants and social cohesion. In addition, nationalists see German threatened by English, not by Turkish or Arabic or anything, not to the threat to the language, as they see it, with the use of Denglish. Ideologies for linguistic rights, for ethnic identity and instrumental usefulness are proclaimed. In practice, that often relies on community and extra-national sources of funding and materials and teacher training and implementation. Bilingual education is rare, but in place, especially in two-way bilingual programs. And I think it's noteworthy, this includes immigrant languages as well as regional languages. Plurilingualism, ideology, instrumental value, and social cohesion is very apparent in official European institutions and documents, and also in these informal charm offensives. And in practice, it means foreign language education and language appreciation in encounter languages, Begegnungssprachen. It's still primarily English, then French, but increasingly immigrant minority languages, Russian, Polish, and Turkish are offered as foreign languages, and also in vocational training, clearly focus on instrumental use of that. And Chinese is expanding as a foreign language offering. It's very popular in many schools. Clearly, they're looking ahead to when English is no longer the dominant world language, and Chinese might become that. And polylingualism is recognized not only in youth varieties for informal group interaction or hip-hop, but also as practical solutions in family friendship networks and for cross-national, cross-ethnic communication, which is increasingly the subject of research, and watch for further discussion of both the results of projects I'm involved in and the toolkit projects. Thanks.